Jesse's brief acquaintance with this new material changed the thrust of his martial arts from throwing to striking. He spent the next few days working out for Leroy and building some of the equipment that was shown in James Lee's book. He got a sandbag, a padded pole and a bucket of sand and started the not too wise mutilation of his hands. He practiced 2 hours a day on the sandbag and was eventually able to break 4 1-inch boards with a corkscrew punch. His roommate Ed Hart eyed his practice with great reservation as to the wisdom of wrecking his hands on bags, boards and pads. Ed had been a middleweight pro boxer and he could drop a 200-pound man with either hand. His boxing ability left him unimpressed with Jesse's assault on inanimate objects. One day he let him test his chop on his stomach, and Jesse can remember the way it bounced off like a rubber ball on a concrete sidewalk. When he coaxed Jesse into trying it the second time, it didn't work any better than it had the first time. Jesse told Ed to try it on him, and he said that he would first try it with half power. Jesse could still remember the deep pain and gasping that followed Ed's blow. It took him a full 3 minutes to get up from the floor, and he thanked his lucky stars that he had only used half power. This experience caused Jesse to increase the amount of practice time that he was devoting to the techniques in James Lee's book, but he doubted if he could have performed any of them in the street. Once he became aware of the Asian striking arts, he became obsessed with the idea of learning them. An opportunity to do this presented itself in the form of a trip to California with Howard Hall and Lloyd Flannery, two of his roommates who were salesmen. His primary purpose in going to California was to look up James Lee and Paul Pung and ask him what he could learn while he was in the area. The day after they arrived, Howard and himself were at Pung's door trying to gain an audience. It was graciously granted, and after they had introduced themselves and told him why they were there, he led them downstairs to his basement practice area. Mr. Pung spent the better part of the afternoon explaining and demonstrating his method of Kempo Karate. The first thing that he demonstrated was the way that he punched. He used a bare vertical fist, and his punching pad was a bare 2x6. Jesse and the others were greatly impressed with the way he could strike the pad without apparent injury to his hand. Mr. Pung told us that he had learned to strike the board with full force over the years, and that anyone could learn to do the same thing, if they took the time to proceed slowly. He told them all that he had been practicing for 20 years and showed them a card that named him as a member of the Hawaiian Kempo Karate Association. Two other things that stood out about Mr. Pung was his ability to move fast with power and the lack of callus on his hands. He was a small man. He weighed about 110 pounds, but there was an air of confidence about him that let you know he wasn't fearful of physical encounters. During the course of the afternoon, Mr. Pung told them about two of his most interesting experiences. One was with a young karate man who had come to visit him when he returned to the US from Okinawa. He said that the young man was big, strong, and quite impressed with his own skill at karate. Mr. Pung had found the young karate man less than impressive because he could only defend to the right side of the body and not to the left. When he asked the young man how he would defend to the left side of his body, the young man claimed that he was so strong on the right that no one would be able to get in on him. Mr. Pung had popped his bubble by repeatedly coming in past his defences. When the young man became angry and tried to hit him, Pung had struck a nerve in the young man's arm that had resulted in a 2-hour paralysis. Mr. Pung told them that the man had left a lot more humble than when he had entered. The second experience he told them about involved in his work. He was a bank teller in one of the local banks, and on one occasion he had backed down a man who was intent on robbing a bank. Mr. Pung had told the would-be robber that if he didn't get out of the bank, that he was going to do him serious harm. The robber believed him and turned and ran. Mr. Pung used Chinese medicine on his hands, and he had a real fascination for the study of Asian medicine and herbs. He talked about Chinese medicine for nearly 2 hours before he got around to the subject of Kung Fu. He told them that they should try to learn Kung Fu if they were really interested in martial arts, in the striking arts. Mr. Pung began his discussion of the art by telling them about Chinese boxers who trained by staring into the sun until it destroyed the centre of their eyes. He said that those Chinese boxers felt that they, having only peripheral vision, would prevent them from fixating on their opponent's moves. The techniques of staring at the sun sounded very impressive, but Jesse made a mental note not to try it on himself. After 4 hours of steady conversation, Mr. Pung told them that they had an appointment to keep, or he had an appointment to keep. They thanked him for answering their endless questions and left. As they were leaving, he said that they all should try to get into one of the Kung Fu schools in San Francisco. He said that it would be very difficult to gain entry into one of these schools, but that it would be well worth the effort if they were to succeed. They spent the next 2 days trying to locate a Kung Fu school. After covering Chinatown without success, they decided that it was impossible for anyone but a Chinese to find a school, much less gain entry into one. Whenever they asked about the art in Chinatown, they got responses like, "What's that? Some kind of Chinese dish?" They finally decided that their best course of action would be to go straight to Oakland and look up James Lee. When they arrived at Lee's door, they were uncertain of the kind of reception that they were going to get because of their experience in San Francisco. Jesse explained to James Lee how they had come to know of him, and he invited them in. He began the demonstration of his art by asking them to throw a punch at him. He quickly countered the punch with a strike to Jesse's ribs that left him gasping for air. He was sure that he had broken at least 2 of his ribs, but he was determined to conceal the pain. He told Jesse to punch again, and he blocked and countered with a strike to the groin. After the second punch, Jesse spent the next couple of minutes thinking that he was going to pass out. It was very difficult not to react to the second punch, and he found himself not caring if Lee saw that he was hurt. Years later, Bruce Lee told him that James Lee had said that he wanted to impress them with the fact that he could hurt them, just in case they had something up their sleeves. Bruce also said that there was a good chance that James Lee might have been drinking at the time. Fortunately, the punching part of the demonstrations was over, and he asked them to follow him into the basement where he kept all his training devices. He first demonstrated the power of the back fist by breaking a 3-inch piece of wood with one blow. He followed the wood breaking demonstration with a back fist shattering of a 2-inch thick piece of marble. However, Howard and Jesse were both wide and amazed by his demonstration of power. Suspended from the ceiling was a large bag that appeared to be filled with sand. Lee hit the bag hard and sent it flying. When he asked Jesse if he wanted to hit it, Jesse figured that he had nothing to lose and hit the bag as hard as he could. He damn near broke his hand because what he assumed to be sand turned out to be ball bearings. James Lee chuckled at the way that Jesse was nursing his injured hand while his mind was learning a lesson about looking before one leaps into the unknown. They talked to Lee for about 3 hours. Him, Howard, etc. talked to Lee for about 3 hours. He told him that he was a brown belt in judo and that he had gotten most of his kung fu training at a school in San Francisco. He said that he had grown tired of doing forms and had turned to the development of his own method, which was a composite of a number of different styles. He felt the primary reason that his system worked was because it was based on power. He showed him some pictures of a man named Al Novak, who he said was his top student. I'm not too sure if that guy was an actor as well, I'm not really sure. The pictures showed Novak breaking a pile of 2-inch thick pieces of marble with his back fist. Lee said that Novak was a powerful man who weighed well over 200 pounds. Years later, Bruce Lee told him that Novak was so strong that no one in the Bay Area could make any kind of wrist lock work on him. Bruce also said that once Novak learned how to straight punch, he would be difficult, if not impossible, to stop when he attacked. Before Jesse, Howard, etc. left James Lee, they asked about the possibility of instruction. He told them that the length of time that they were going to spend in the area was not long enough to learn even the basic moves of his system. They asked him if he knew of anyone in the Seattle area teaching Kung Fu. He said no. Howard and Jesse thanked him for the demonstration and headed back to San Francisco. A few days later, they decided to cut the trip short and return to Seattle. Chapter 2. The first week after returning to Seattle, Jesse ran into a judo friend, Charlie Wu. He told him that he had just returned from California where he had been seeking information on karate and kung fu. He gave him the highlights of the trip and discussed how difficult it was to get anyone to talk about kung fu. Charlie then told him that he would be happy to know that there was going to be a kung fu demonstration during the Seafair celebration. So Jesse asked him when was it scheduled, and he said that he didn't know, but that he would find out as soon as possible and let him know. He thought it strange that he had gone all the way to California looking for kung fu, and here it was coming to Seattle. The next few times that he saw Charlie, he bugged him about the date. When he finally told him the time and the place, he settled back to wait for the start of Seafair, an annual summer event in Seattle. A few weeks later, Ed Hart and he were rooted in the front stage in Chinatown waiting for the demonstration to begin. The area was crowded with people, but none of them were closer to the stage than Jesse. His arms were resting on the platform edge where he was in a position to get a worm's eye view of the whole performance. When it was finally time for the Gung Fu demonstration, someone came out and announced that there would be a delay in order that a cha-cha demonstration could be shown. The dancers were a young girl and a guy who made dancing look as though it required little effort. The dancers went through 20 different routines, and Jesse felt like screaming at them to hurry up. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the dancing ended and the Kung Fu demonstrations began. After the members of the group had filed across the stage and stood facing the audience, a spokesman for the group stepped out and gave a little background on Kung Fu and told all who the group represented. The group was from the Chinese Youth Club, and most of the things that they were going to demonstrate were from the Southern Mantis style of Kung Fu. One of the group members was the same guy who had just demonstrated the cha-cha. The first person to demonstrate weighed around 200 pounds, and the form that he demonstrated made him look very formidable. The outstanding feature of the form was the way in which the attack was directed to the head and the upper body. The attacking weapons were the knees and the elbows. The narrator closely followed each move of the form and explained its purpose to the audience. Jesse was very impressed with the form and made a mental note never to give in to the demonstrator's way. Several other people went through forms, and they all looked as impressive as the first demonstrator. The last man to perform was the same one who had danced the cha-cha. The narrator said that his name was Bruce Lee, and that he had just arrived from California. Bruce did a beautiful form, the praying mantis. The form involved a lot of intricate hand movements, which Bruce made even more impressive by popping his knuckles as he went through them. Jesse was totally fascinated with Bruce's moves and vowed that he was going to learn to move the same way. Little did he know that only a year later he would be performing on the same stage as Bruce's #1 student. Fate must have been on his side, because a week later he discovered that Bruce lived only 4 blocks from his house and that they both attended Edison Technical School. He saw Bruce Lee walking ahead of him every morning on the way to school, and he began to try to think of a way to approach him without turning him off. After a great deal of thought, he came up with the idea that he would be better received by Bruce if he thought that he knew something about the striking arts. From that day forward, he made it a point to get ahead of Bruce each morning on the way to school. Every time that he passed a telephone pole, he would either hit it or kick it, pretending that he didn't notice Bruce walking behind him. After a week or so of assaulting poles, he decided that it was time to approach Bruce Lee and ask him about instruction. He couldn't devise a cool approach, so he just waited for him to start walking towards school one day, caught up with him and asked if his name was Bruce Lee. He said that Bruce Lee was his name and asked him what he wanted. Jesse asked him if he practiced Kung Fu, and he said yeah he did. When he asked him if he would teach him, he hesitated. He said that he was very anxious to learn, and told him about his trip to California and the unsuccessful search for Kung Fu instruction. Bruce looked at him for a long time before he answered, and he got the feeling that he was weighing things in his mind. Finally, he said that he would teach Jesse, but that it had to be in a secret spot where no one could watch. He asked Jesse if he had a place where they could practice. Jesse told him that they could use his living room. He asked Jesse if he lived alone, and he told him that he had 2 roommates. He said that they would have to leave the house whenever they practiced. So he assured him that he would get rid of them, and he asked him for directions to his house. When he arrived at school, Bruce asked what time he ate lunch. When they arrived at school, Bruce Lee asked him what time they ate lunch. He told him that he ate around 12 or noon, and then he told him to meet him in the school lounge. He was there at 12 on the dot, and so was Bruce. He spent the lunch period asking about his trip to California, while he spent the time asking about the form that he had seen him demonstrate at Sife. Bruce Lee told him that the praying mantis wasn't his style, and that the form had been taught to him by Fu Kyung, one of the instructors at the Chinese Youth Club. He said that his own style was called Wing Chun, which was one of the more modern, progressive Kung Fu styles. He said that he had practiced the style for 4 years before he came to the United States from Hong Kong to attend school. Bruce wanted to know all that Jesse could tell him about the California Kung Fu man James Lee. When he told him about James Lee's book, he said that it was the first time that he'd ever heard of a Kung Fu book being written in English. He asked him how James Lee stood when he moved, and he gave him several illustrated stances to pick from. Jesse picked the horse stance as the one that James Lee had used, and Bruce said that he was probably from the Gung style. He told him that he had James Lee's book at home and offered to loan it to him. Bruce and Jesse met after school and walked home together. Bruce spent the time giving him a rundown on Kung Fu history. They stopped at the corner a block away from Ruby Chow restaurant where he lived, and they spent a couple of hours going over a variety of moves from several different Kung Fu styles. When Jesse asked him how his style looked, he told him that it didn't have the grace and beauty of other styles, but it more than made up for this deficiency by being one of the more functional fighting systems or styles. Bruce Lee said that the basic lack of beauty in the style was one of the reasons that it wasn't more popular. He said that it was difficult to demonstrate the effectiveness of the style to the uninitiated without hitting them. He also said that few people were skillful enough to tie up people without hitting them. We're not too interested in improving the effectiveness of the method unless they were involved in a fight. Finally, Bruce Lee said that he had to go to work, but that he would see Jesse at 6. Jesse rushed home and told both of his roommates that Bruce Lee was going to teach him Kung Fu, and one of the conditions was that no one else could be around him. In other words, you got to go get lost. Ed and Ron both realised how important Bruce's instruction was to him, to Jesse, and said that Ed and Ron both realised how important Bruce's instructions were to Jesse, and said that they would gladly leave whenever he came to teach. At 6 o'clock there was a knock at the door, and there was Bruce Lee, ready to give Jesse private lessons. He asked Bruce to come in and showed him around the place. Once he had assured himself that there wasn't anyone there, he said, "Let's get on with it." First he asked Jesse to show him what he knew about Kung Fu. The only things that Jesse knew had been taken from James Lee's book, and Bruce was hardly impressed with his performance. Bruce asked to see Lee's book, and he spent 10 minutes thumbing through the pages without saying a word. When he finally spoke, it was to tell him, Jesse, that most of the techniques in the book were from the Hung style of Kung Fu, which he had once practiced. Bruce said that the Hung was very popular in Hong Kong because of its reputation for strong footwork and punching power. Bruce was impressed with the demonstration of Lee's breaking power. The cover showed Lee breaking either a large board or a piece of marble. Bruce Lee asked if Jesse knew anything about other martial arts, and he told him that he had done a little boxing in the Air Force and that he was currently practicing judo. Bruce said that he wasn't too familiar with either boxing or judo and asked for a demonstration of the latter. So Jesse began his demonstration by showing him his favourite throw, Osotogari. When he came in on him to do the throw, he expected a little resistance. The speed of the throw and Bruce's lack of resistance caused him to go with it a lot faster than he had anticipated, and his head narrowly missed the sharp middle corner of the beard. It was a near miss that could have killed or maimed him, but Bruce showed no reaction. He was impressed with Jesse's throwing, but he didn't like the idea of having to hold on to do it. Bruce demonstrated the effectiveness of his style by having Jesse throw punches at him from any and all angles. He said, "Hit me any way that you can." So Jesse threw jabs, hooks and haymakers as fast as he could, but none of them made contact. Each punch was blocked, and Jesse always ended up staring at the wrong end of Bruce's fist. Once he had shown him that he could stop all of his punches from long range, Jesse's punches, he demonstrated that Jesse was completely helpless at close range. Every time that his hands made contact with Bruce's hands made contact with Jesse's, he was unable to do anything. His hands controlled Jesse's with the kind of friction that stopped any kind of forward movement. Whenever he tried to nullify this friction by changing his angle of attack, Bruce would also change his angle of defense, and his hands were still unable to move forward. So he was well versed in Chi Sao, or sticky hands, from Wing Chun Kung Fu. Jesse figured that if he wasn't able to get in, he would at least be able to get away. But when he tried to withdraw his hands, he found that he wasn't able to. Pulled them back without getting hit. Next, he attempted to disengage and go around his hands, but this strategy was met with direct strikes to his chest, Jesse's chest. Before Bruce finished his demonstration of Wing Chun hand entrapment techniques, Jesse was convinced that he could both hit and control Jesse at will. Once he was positive that he had convinced Jesse of the effectiveness of the style, Bruce went back to the beginning and showed him the basis for Wing Chun. He said that the style had been developed by a woman whose name was Wing Chun. She had first learned self-defense from a Buddhist nun named Nhi Ngui, and later had developed her own system. She had developed the style at a time when there was a great deal of bragging among the proponents of different kung fu styles as to which one was the best. Wing Chun decided to prove that none of them were very good. She did this by creating a style with principles based on skill rather than strength. Bruce said that the fact that Wing Chun was a woman had a lot to do with the type of system that she formulated. She didn't have the same strength as a man, so she was forced to develop ways to compensate for this deficit.